Hello students, in this session we will be discussing Hindu reforms and modernization in the Indian context. Various religious reforms carried out in India in the past advocated reforms in practices connected with majority, that is the Hindu people. A reformer is a person who is concerned about the humanity and mankind above anything else, a person who wants to change the existing state of things for the better. Every country in its history has had numerous bright individuals who would like to live and work for the progress and upliftment of the downtrodden person in the society, and due to their efforts it became possible to abolish several extreme social evils. India is fortunate to have in its long history many extraordinary human beings who devoted all their lives for the betterment of the society and for the upliftment of the downtrodden. Any society consists of diverse and different types of persons, persons with different religions, castes, colors, gender and faiths, etc. And it is expected that they all should live in harmony and without discrimination. Ideal situation is when there is equality, freedom and brotherhood among all sections of society. The Indian society too in the first half of the 19th century was suffering from social evils such as casteism, superstitious sati, parda, female illiteracy, widow remarriage and child marriage, etc., which stood in the way of its progress. People also believed in ending the system of Devadasi who were attached to the temples, and also advocated that the wealth of the temples should not be amassed by the priest, but should have public control over it. The urgent need for social reform began to manifest itself from the early decades of the 19th century. When the British came to India, they introduced certain modern ideas such as liberty, social and economic equality, fraternity, democracy and justice, which had a tremendous impact on Indian society. Many religious and social reformers were advocating the eradication of the evils prevalent at the time and were trying to bring reforms in the society so that it could face the challenges of the West. They were no longer willing to accept the traditions, beliefs, practices in the society simply because they had been observed for centuries. Indian intellectuals who got educated in the Western world closely scrutinized the country's past and found that many beliefs and practices were no longer of any use and needed to be discarded. They also discovered that many aspects of India's culture heritage were of intrinsic values to India's cultural awakening. The result was the birth of many socio-religious reform movements touching almost every segment of Indian society. Although religious reform was the integral part of these movements, none of them were totally religious in character. They were humanist in aspiration and rejected salvation's the agenda. They focused on worldly existence. The socio-cultural regeneration in 19th century was influenced by colonial state but not created by it. The newly emerging middle class and the traditional or western educated intellectuals were responsible for it. We can see the categories of religious and social reform movements that happened in India. The reform movements fall in two broad categories. One is reformist movements that Brahma Samaj, Parthana Samaj. The second one is revivalist movement like Arya Samaj and Ramakrishna Mission. Both the reformist and revivalist movement depended on a varying degree on an appeal to the lost purity of the religion they sought to reform. The only difference one reform movement and the other lay in the degree to which it relied on tradition or on reason and conscience. Another significant aspect of all the reform movements was their emphasis on both religious and social reforms. This link was primarily due to two main reasons. One is almost every social custom and institution in India derived sustenance from religious injunctions and sanctions. This meant that no social reform could be undertaken unless the existing religious notions which sustained the social customs were also reformed. Now we can see the characteristics of religious and social reform movements. From the late 19th century, a number of European and Indian scholars started the study of ancient India's history, philosophy, science, religions and literatures. This growing knowledge of India's past glory provided to the Indian people a sense of pride for our civilization. It also helped the reformers in their work of religious and social reform for their struggle against all type of inhuman practices and superstitious beliefs, etc. Since they had become associated with religious beliefs, therefore, most of the movements of social reform were of religious character. These social and religious reform movements arose among all communities and territories of the Indian people. They attacked bigotry, superstition and the hold of the priestly class. They worked for abolition of castes and untouchability, sati, child marriage, social inequalities and illiteracy. Some of these reformers were supported directly or indirectly by the British officials, and some of the reformers also supported reformative steps and regulations framed by the British government. An analysis of religious and social reform movements of the 19th century brings out several common features. They are as follows. All the reformers attacked priesthood, rituals, idolatry and polytheism. The humanitarian aspect of these reform movements was expressed in their attack on the caste system and the custom of child marriage. The reformers attempted to improve the status of girls and women in the society, particularly for female education. By attacking the caste system and untouchability, the reformers helped to unify the people of India into one nation. All the reformers propagated the idea of one God and the basic unity of all religions. Thus, they tried to bridge the gulf between the different religious beliefs. The reform movements fostered feelings of self-respect, self-reliance and patriotism among the Indians, factors that gave rise to reform movements. Presence of colonial government on Indian soil. When the British came to India, they introduced the English language as well as certain modern ideas. These ideas were those of liberty, social and economic equality, fraternity, democracy and justice, which had a tremendous impact on Indian society. Religious and social ills were existing in Indian society. Undignified status of women was prevalent on a large scale. From the late 19th century onwards, spread of education helped the reformers in their work of religious and social reform for their struggle against all types of inhuman practices and superstitious beliefs. Awareness of the outside world. During the last decades of the 19th century, the rising tide of nationalism and democracy also found expression in movements to reform and democratize the social institutions and religious outlook of the Indian people. Factors such as growth of nationalist sentiments, emergence of new economic forces, spread of education, impact of modern Western ideas and culture and increased awareness of the world strengthened the resolve to reform. Now we can see the chronicle of reform movements. The first soundings of intellectual revolt in Maharashtra were heard in the early decades of 19th century. Among the early intellectuals who initiated and led the movement, many were the pioneer of the intellectual movement of Maharashtra. Here the religion as a tool to reform. The religious reform was a prerequisite for social reforms, as the social life of both Hindus and Muslims were influenced by religious tenets. Hinduism was dominated by superstitions and priests. Idolatry, animal sacrifice, physical torture was common to appease God. Social life too was depressing. Sati, female infanticide, child marriage and social boycott of widows were common. Caste system had created divisions in the society making it difficult to support a united mass movement. Untouchability was prevalent too. Reformists sought to create a climate of modernization. They used faith to challenge such practices. They referred to the period of the past when no such practices existed, but they used it as only an aid and an instrument. Thus, they wanted to prove that no practice like sati, child marriage, etc., were sanctioned by religion. Blind adherence to Western ideology was not practices but reform indigenous culture. Thus, modernization, not westernization, was the aim. We can see eminent Hindu reformers and their contributions to reformation. The first one is Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Brahmo Samaj. He is considered as the first modern man as he was the pioneer of socio-religious and political reform movements in modern India. He studied numerous languages: Persian, Arabic, Sanskrit, English, French, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, etc. in order to study the various religious scriptures in their original form. He wished to purify Hinduism by removing all kinds of evils that had crept into it over centuries. He believed in monotheism, that is, doctrine of unity of God, had and opposed idol worship. He found the Upanishads as the basis of true Hinduism. He started touching upon many burning social issues of the time, including the widely prevalent practice of becoming sati. In 1829, the custom of sati was formally abolished. He also condemned polygamy and many other forms of subjugation of women. Roy was also an advocate of modern education. In 1828, its enlarged edition was called the Brahmo Sabha, which was renamed Brahma Samaj later on. After Roy's death in 1833, the Brahmo Samaj started getting disorganized. The next person to be noted is Rabindranath Tagore. He joined Brahmo Samaj in 1842 and he gave a definite shape and popularized it beyond the city of Calcutta. In 1843, he wrote Brahma Covenant. This covenant was a statement of the creed of the Samaj and made a list of duties and obligations of its members. Then, Young Bengal movement, founded by Henry Vivian, teacher at the Hindu College between 1826 to 1831, movement attacked old traditions and advocated women's rights and education and educating the public on the current socio-economic and political questions through press and public associations. They carried on public agitation on public questions like freedom of the press, trial by jury and protection of peasants, etc. Arya Samaj. It was founded by Dayananda Saraswati between the period of 1824 to 1883 and it was revivalist movement in the late of 19th century India. It started in the western India and Punjab and gradually spread to a large part of Hindi heartland. He attacked Puranas, polytheism, idolatry and domination of the priestly class. He adopted Hindi for reaching out to the masses. He also opposed child marriage. He was fiercely opposed to multiplicity of castes, which he thought was primarily responsible for encouraging conversion of lower caste into Christianity and Islam. After Dayanand's death in 1883, the Samaj launched and shattered. Sudhiti movement. It means the reconversion of those Hindus who had once been willingly or forcibly converted into other religions, but were now willing to come back into the fold of Hinduism. Also, it prevented further conversion. It was considered by the Arya Samajists as a potent instrument for effecting socio-religious and political unity of India. Next comes Swami Vivekananda. He spread the message of spiritual Hinduism in America and Europe during his tour 1893 to 97. He established Ramakrishna Mission in 1897 and set up a math at Bellur. Vivekananda was opposed to degeneration in religion, manifold divisions, caste rigidities, practice of untouchability, superstitions, etc. He pointed out that the present condition of Hindus was due to their ignorance, which was helped by their being a subject race. He believed that India had to learn work ethics, forms of organization and technological advances from the West. Next comes the Ramakrishna Mission, another notable reform movement in Bengal, which soon spread to other parts of the country during the late 19th century, was the Ramakrishna Mission. The movement began under an ascetic and priest G. Chatterjee or Swami Ramakrishna between the period of 1836 to 1886. He preached universality of all religions and favored preserving beliefs and rituals of Hinduism. Among his important disciples was Narendranath or Swami Vivekananda, who accepted Ramakrishna as his guru in 1885. He spread the message of spiritual Hinduism in America and Europe during his tour of 1893 and 97. Theosophical Society. The Theosophical movement came to be allied with Hindu Renaissance. The society believes in reincarnation, karma and draws from the philosophy of the Upanishads and Samkhya, Yoga and Vedanta school of thought. After the death of Olcott in 1907, Annie Besant was elected as the president. The society under Besant concentrated on the revival of Hinduism and its ancient ideas, and in order to provide Hindu religious instruction. She founded the Central Hindu University at Varanasi in 1898, which was later developed into the Banaras Hindu University by Madan Mohan Malviya. Now we can see some other movements, that is Justice Movement. It was started in 1915 to 16 by C. N. Mudaliar, T. M. Nair and P. Tyagaraja Chetty in Madras. It was against the predominance of Brahmins in education, government services and politics. The Madras Presidency Association was founded in 1917 to demand separate representation in the legislature for lower caste. Then comes the Ilava movement. It was launched by Sri Narayana Guru. He started the movement of untouchable Ilava against the Brahmin dominance in Kerala. He rejected the caste system and developed the concept of one caste, one religion and one God for mankind. His disciple Ayyappan made it into no religion, no caste and no God for mankind. Then comes the self-respect movement. Led by E. V. Ramasamy Nayakar, broadly known as Periyar, opposed Brahminical religion and started it in the mid of 1920s. The movement aimed at nothing short or a rejection of Brahminical religion and culture, which Nayakar felt was the prime instrument of exploitation of the lower caste. He took an active part in the anti-liquor movement and Vaikam Satyagraha in 1924. Self-respect movement had two aims: demanding sanction of more concessions and privileges which would cause discrimination against the Brahmins to surpass Brahmins in education and social status. The second one is achieving Swayam Maryada or self-respect. The main objectives of this movement were inculcation and dissemination of knowledge of political education, right to lead life with dignity and self-respect, and do away with the exploitative system based on superstitions and beliefs, abolition of the evil social practices and protection of women's rights, establishment and maintenance of homes for orphans and widow, and opening of educational institutions for them. This movement gained popularity in no time and became a political platform. He attacked the laws of Manu, which he called the basis of the entire Hindu social fabric of caste. He founded the Tamil journals Kudiyarasu, Puratchi and Vidudalai to propagate his ideals. In 1938, the Tamil Nadu Women's Conference appreciated the noble service rendered by EVR and he was given the title Periyar. On 27th June 1970, the UNESCO organization praised and adorned him with the title Socrates of South Asia. Now we can see what is this Veda Samaj. Inspired by the Brahma Samaj, Veda Samaj was established in Madras in 1864. It advocated eliminating caste distinctions and promoting widow remarriage and girl education. This movement was further spread by S. Chembeti Naidu, who translated books of Brahma Samaj in Tamil and Telugu. Various branches of Brahma Samaj of South Asia were established in some cities of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Andhra. The next movement is Sri Narayana Guru Dharma Paripalana or SNDP movement. This movement was an example of regional movement that arose from conflict between the lower caste and the upper caste. Sri Narayana Guru Swami founded it among the Elavas of Kerala, a backward caste of toddy tappers who were considered untouchables and were denied education and entry into temples. During the pre-independence period, a number of backward class movements arose. The backward classes banded together against the Brahmins in particular, believing that they monopolized much of the social economic benefits, leaving the agricultural intermediate caste and communities in the lurch. Now we can see what is this Okaligara Sangha. In 1905, the Okaligara Sangha initiated an anti-Brahmin movement in Mysore. In India, caste is a system of social division that also serves as a mechanism of identity. Religious prejudices and dogmas entangled Indian society in the 19th century, creating a web. All religions, including Hinduism, had devolved into a mashup of magic, animism and superstition. Now we can see the contributions of the reform movements in the Indian social structure. Many reformers like Dayananda Saraswati and Vivekananda upheld Indian philosophy and culture. They instilled in Indians a sense of pride and faith in their own culture. Female education was promoted, schools for girls were set up. Even medical colleges were established for women. This led to the development, though slow, of girls' education. The cultural and ideological struggle taken up by the socio-religious movements helped to build up national consciousness. They thus paved the way for the growth of nationalism. From the late 19th century, since they had become associated with religious belief, therefore most of the movements of social reform were of a religious character. The challenges of Sanskritization and Westernization were knocking at the doors of India at large. The internal socio-religious issues never allowed to feel the penetration of the above two into Indian ethos. The intermingled ethos of West blended in patriotic colors became the fuel for freedom to greater extent. The pressure of British rule in India unleashed certain forces, sometimes through direct administrative measures and sometimes indirectly by creating favorable circumstances. A close interlink between caste and vocation could hardly continue in a state of destruction of village autarky. Beside modern commerce and industry gave birth to several economic avenues, while growing urbanization and modern means of transport added to the mobility of populations. The administrative services were made open to all castes and the new education system was totally on secular lines. The independent India started addressing internal concerns. Meanwhile, the Cold War for partitions and unrest brought newer chaos in the state of democracy. External intrusions and prevention strategies reduced the speed of newborn baby in the world, but still it grew as a mighty tree which grew near the riverside and gave shades to millions of living beings along with their struggles. The influence of media and relevance of underprivileged people in decision making could not resist its evolution. Its emancipation from the clutches of caste, creed and gender is still a dream to be achieved. Thank you.